Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to try to put together all the pieces of Alvin Andrew Kelly's crimes.
Okay.
Convicted of multiple murders in Texas in the 1980s, his case is a tangled web of drug trafficking and violence and just years and years of legal battles.
Yeah.
We're going to examine not just the what in this deep dive,
Mhm.
but also the why behind his actions.
I think it's a case that really forces you to kind of confront the darkest parts of human nature and uh, systems that sometimes fail to protect the innocent.
Right. So to set the stage, Alvin Andrew Kelly was born in Texas in 1951.
Mhm.
Now, his path led him deep into a dangerous world, working as a debt collector for Walter W. Shannon, a notorious drug trafficker. He was operating in Kilgore, Texas.
Right.
Do you think that environment had a direct impact on his later actions?
Well, for sure. I mean, this case is a prime example of how the drug trade breeds a culture of violence. I
Yeah.
mean, settling scores often turns deadly, and human life can become tragically expendable.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's in this context that we meet Jerry and Brenda Morgan, the couple serving as reserve marshals, essentially part-time law enforcement officers, in Longview, Texas.
Okay.
Now, it appears Kelly discovered they were providing information about Shannon's drug activities to authorities.
Yeah, Kelly learning about the Morgans' involvement with law enforcement, it just created this incredibly volatile situation. I mean, it was almost inevitable that things would escalate.
Right, and escalate they did. In late April 1984, Kelly, along with his brother Stephen and another drug dealer named Ronnie Lee Wilson, they went to the Morgans' trailer. It seems the purpose was intimidation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a clear power play. I mean, during this confrontation, Kelly pistol whipped Jerry Morgan, even boasting that he could end Jerry's life whenever he wanted.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard to grasp the terror the Morgans must have felt. Was this a common tactic for someone like Kelly?
Yeah.
A way to maintain control through fear?
Sadly, yes. Yeah, in the world Kelly operated in, violence was often the preferred method of communication and control. You know, it was a way to instill fear and ensure compliance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this wasn't just a warning, was it? Just days later, on April 30th, Kelly returned to the Morgans' trailer with his wife, Cynthia, and Ronnie Lee Wilson. Cynthia, of course, later became a key witness in the case.
Right.
So,
According to Cynthia's testimony, Kelly immediately entered the bedroom and shot Jerry Morgan.
wow.
The sound of the gunshots drew Cynthia into the bedroom where she encountered this horrifying scene. Kelly was pinning Brenda Morgan against the wall as their 22-month-old son, Devin, cried nearby.
Oh my gosh. It's difficult to even imagine the terror they must have felt in those moments. What happened next?
So Cynthia tried to comfort Devin, but Kelly shot Brenda in the neck, dragged her to the bedroom, and left her next to her dead husband. Horrifically, Brenda was still alive, pleading with Cynthia for help. Yeah. So Cynthia put a towel under Brenda's head to try and stop the bleeding before returning to the living room to comfort Devin.
Oh, that's awful. It's almost too painful to process. Brenda was still alive, and Kelly just left her there.
Right.
What kind of person does that?
It's a question that haunts everyone who examines this case.
Yeah.
But it actually gets even more disturbing. Kelly followed Cynthia back into the living room, took Devin from her arms, and shot the infant. And then he ordered Cynthia back to the car.
This is just beyond comprehension. What happened to Brenda?
Tragically, after Cynthia left the trailer, Kelly went back to the bedroom and shot Brenda again, this time killing her. He then staged the scene, placing Devin's body on top of his father's.
It's chilling to think about the level of calculated brutality involved. And to think, according to Cynthia's sister, Kelly later bragged about the murders and even replaced photos in a family album with pictures of the Morgans.
Yeah, that detail really speaks volumes about Kelly's state of mind at the time.
Wow.
He seemed to revel in the violence and the fear he instilled in others.
So the next day, a relative, worried after not hearing from the Morgans, went to their trailer and discovered the bodies.
Right.
The police were called, and a full-scale investigation was launched. But with such a horrific crime, you'd think they'd have a suspect right away.
Not in this case. Despite their efforts, the initial investigation stalled. I mean, they lacked a clear motive beyond Kelly's connection to the Morgans as informants. They couldn't determine the murder weapon, and they were left with very few leads. You know, the case remained unsolved, leaving the community on edge.
I can only imagine the frustration and fear that gripped the town during this time.
Right.
But I understand another murder brought Alvin Andrew Kelly back into focus. Tell me about that.
Okay, so on June 9th, the body of John Eugene Ford was discovered at Lake Cherokee. He had been shot multiple times. Initially, it seemed like an entirely separate case.
Two murders, seemingly unconnected. That must have put immense pressure on the investigators.
Absolutely, but there was a development. Investigators discovered that a burned vehicle, found a week earlier, actually belonged to John Ford's father. And this connection, along with Kelly seeking treatment for gasoline burns shortly after Ford's disappearance, made him a person of interest.
Interesting. So they had a possible link to both murders, but did they have enough to arrest him at that point?
Not for the Morgan murders.
Okay.
They did issue a warrant for his arrest on unrelated drug distribution charges, hoping to bring him in for questioning. However, concrete evidence linking him to either murder was still lacking.
It seems Kelly was constantly in and out of trouble with the law.
Yes, between 1984 and 1990, Kelly served time for various minor offenses. Upon release in 1990, he moved to Oklahoma, assuming a new identity, Doyle Gilbreth.
Oh, wow.
It seems he was trying to escape his past.
But the past has a way of catching up, doesn't it?
Indeed. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. The story takes another turn, a discovery that links Kelly directly to the murder of John Ford.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface of this complex case.
Yeah.
Join us for part 2 as we delve deeper into the investigation, the trial, and the legal battles that followed.
Right. Welcome back. When we left off, Alvin Andrew Kelly had just been convicted for the murder of John Ford and sentenced to 35 years in prison. It seemed like his story, though horrific, might have reached its conclusion.
That's what everyone thought, right? I mean, he was serving time, but then came a twist that completely reshaped the case.
Yeah.
5 months after that Ford conviction, Kelly's ex-wife Cynthia offered to testify against him for the Morgan family murders. This was a huge development. I mean, Cynthia had firsthand knowledge of what happened that night.
It certainly was. Cynthia's decision to come forward must have just sent shockwaves through the legal system, you know? It's important to remember the context of the time. I mean, domestic violence was often silenced and victims were afraid to speak out, especially against someone as dangerous as Kelly.
That makes sense. Testifying against someone capable of such violence must have been terrifying for Cynthia. But her bravery ultimately led to Kelly being charged with the Morgan murders. Do you think the prosecution's case would have been strong enough without her testimony?
It's difficult to say for certain. I mean, the prosecution was already building a case against Kelly, but Cynthia's eyewitness account was undoubtedly a crucial piece of the puzzle. Her willingness to testify added weight and credibility to their case.
So the stage was set for a high-profile trial. What can you tell us about the legal proceedings? I imagine it was quite a spectacle.
Well, the prosecution leaned heavily on Cynthia's account of the murders. In addition to her testimony, Kelly's brother and sister-in-law provided corroborating evidence. This created a pretty compelling narrative for the prosecution.
This was a complex case with years of investigation and multiple murders. What was Kelly's defense strategy? Did they try to paint him as a victim of circumstance, given his involvement in the drug trade?
Interestingly, no. The defense, led by attorney Harry Hurd, didn't focus on the drug trade aspect. Instead, they concentrated on trying to discredit Cynthia's testimony.
Okay.
They pointed to inconsistencies in her statements over time, hoping to raise doubts about her reliability and her memory.
That's a common tactic, right? Casting doubt on the eyewitness. Do you think it was effective in this case, or did it backfire?
The defense's approach was a gamble. While they highlighted inconsistencies, the prosecution countered effectively. They argued that Cynthia's initial reluctance to cooperate was understandable given the trauma she'd experienced and the fear she lived with for years.
So a classic legal battle, both sides presenting their arguments, trying to sway the jury. What was the outcome of the trial?
Well, after a relatively short deliberation, the jury found Alvin Andrew Kelly guilty on all charges related to the murder of Devin Morgan. The verdict was a major victory for the prosecution and brought a sense of closure, albeit a painful one, to the Morgan family and the Longview community.
Guilty on all charges. That must have been a heavy blow to Kelly. Given the severity of the crime, especially the murder of a child, was he given the death penalty?
Yes, he was. The jury, having found him guilty, then had to decide on the sentence. Given the brutality of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim, they sentenced Kelly to death.
So after years of investigations, trials, and legal maneuvering, Kelly was held accountable for the murders of the Morgan family. But I imagine the story doesn't end there. There were appeals. More legal battles ahead.
You're right. As is typical in death penalty cases, there were years of appeals and legal challenges. Kelly, throughout his time on death row, maintained his innocence and fought to overturn his conviction.
It's not uncommon for those on death row to exhaust every legal avenue available. Was Kelly successful in any of his appeals?
Despite his best efforts, all of his appeals were unsuccessful. The courts, after reviewing the case and the evidence presented, found no grounds to overturn the jury's verdict or the sentence.
So, facing the reality of his impending execution, how did Kelly react? Did he show remorse? Make any final statements?
On the day of his execution in 2008, Kelly did deliver a final statement. It was lengthy and rambling, and in it, he expressed his newfound faith in Christianity. He offered apologies to both the Morgan and Ford families.
Interesting. So, facing his final moments, he turned to faith.
Hmm.
Did he confess to the murders in his final statement or maintain his innocence?
It was a strange mix of confession and denial. He admitted to killing John Ford, but he continued to deny any involvement in the murders of the Morgan family. This final act left many wondering about his motives, his sincerity, and if he felt genuine remorse.
Admitting to one murder but denying another, that's incredibly perplexing. Did this final statement offer any insight into his state of mind, or did it just add to the enigma of Alvin Andrew Kelly?
Unfortunately, it's difficult to say. I mean, some viewed it as a desperate attempt to salvage a shred of dignity, you know? Others saw it as a sign of genuine regret for one crime, but a persistent delusion about the other. Ultimately, Kelly's final statement just added another layer of complexity to an already complicated and disturbing case.
So, a man who committed such brutal acts found solace in faith in his final moments. It's a jarring juxtaposition. We've covered so much ground today. Kelly's early life, his involvement with the drug trade, the murders, the investigations, the trial, and the appeals. What awaits us in the final part of this exploration?
In the final part, we'll examine the wider context of this case. We'll delve into the impact of the drug trade on individuals and communities, the crucial role of witness testimony, and the ethical considerations surrounding capital punishment. It's a lot to unpack, but these are important discussions to have, especially given the gravity of this case.
I agree. There's still so much to explore. Join us for part 3 as we wrap up our deep dive into the case of Alvin Andrew Kelly. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the case of Alvin Andrew Kelly. It's been, I don't know about you, but it's been a heavy journey for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Tracing his path from, a life entangled in the drug trade to the brutal murders that landed him on death row. As we wrap up, I want to shift our focus to the wider context. We've talked about how Kelly's actions were shaped by the environment he operated in.
Right.
But how much did the drug trade itself influence the events that unfolded?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. I mean, Kelly's role as a debt collector placed him in a dangerous world. You know, the drug trade, by its very nature, often fosters a culture where violence is just the norm.
Right.
Disputes are settled with force, and respect is earned through intimidation.
So are you suggesting that the drug trade created an environment where violence was almost an expected outcome? That's a disturbing thought.
It is. But it's a reality we have to confront. I think this case underscores the far-reaching consequences of the drug trade.
Right.
It's not just about the substances themselves. It's about the damage inflicted on individuals, on families, and on entire communities.
This case isn't just about one man's crimes, then. It forces us to look at the systemic issues that contribute to these cycles of violence.
Exactly. Yeah, it raises questions about the effectiveness of our strategies to combat drug trafficking and the support systems we have in place for those who get caught in its web.
Thinking back on this case, Cynthia's decision to testify was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Coming forward, despite the fear and risk, was instrumental in bringing Kelly to justice.
Absolutely. Her testimony highlights the essential role that witnesses play in these cases, especially when dealing with domestic violence, which is often shrouded in silence. Cynthia's courage should really inspire others who might find themselves in similar situations.
Right.
It shows that even years after a crime, speaking up can make a difference.
It's a powerful reminder that even one voice can break the silence and help bring perpetrators to justice. But let's not forget the challenges faced by the investigators in this case.
Right.
They were dealing with multiple murders, a suspect actively evading capture, and a lack of initial evidence. Their persistence was remarkable.
Oh, absolutely. Their dedication, even when the trail went cold, ultimately led to Kelly's arrest and conviction for John Ford's murder. It's a testament to the hard work and the determination of law enforcement.
And of course, we can't forget the victims in this case.
Yeah.
Jerry, Brenda, little Devin, and John Ford. Their lives were tragically cut short, leaving behind families and loved ones who will forever carry the weight of their loss. This case is a stark reminder of the devastating human cost of violence.
You're right. It's crucial to remember the individuals behind the headlines. These weren't just names in a case file. These were people with lives, with hopes and dreams that were brutally extinguished.
We've explored many facets of this case, but one topic always sparks debate, especially in cases like this: capital punishment.
Yeah.
Alvin Andrew Kelly was sentenced to death and ultimately executed. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the death penalty?
The death penalty is it's a complex issue with deeply held beliefs on both sides. There are valid arguments for and against it. Some view it as a just punishment for certain crimes, a necessary form of retribution. Others see it as cruel and unusual, arguing that the state shouldn't have the power to take a life regardless of the crime.
It's a conversation that extends far beyond this case, but it's important to engage in these discussions thoughtfully and respectfully.
I agree. Cases like this force us to confront difficult questions about justice, morality, and the role of the legal system. There are no easy answers, but it's through these challenging conversations that we can hopefully move toward a more just and compassionate society.
As we conclude our deep dives into the case of Alvin Andrew Kelly, I'm left with this. Well, I'm left with a sense of sadness,
Yeah.
but also a renewed appreciation for the power of speaking out against injustice and the importance of critical thinking and empathy, especially when grappling with complex issues.
It's a case that stays with you. It prompts reflection on the dark side of human nature and the systems that sometimes fail us, and the importance of seeking justice for victims.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has provided you with insights that will linger long after this episode ends.